All right, 40K enthusiasts, we are continuing our Tactica understanding. I believe there are between, I made a rough list, 8 and 10, or 8 and 11 core fundamental tactics in Warhammer 40,000 that are potentially always in play regardless of your army, regardless of the mission, and regardless of the army that your opponent's facing. It's almost like we have these three steps where first you need to know how your army plays. You have to have a plan for every unit. You have to figure out generally how the units are going to be supported with each other on the table, how any special abilities based on your army, how you're going to try and maximize those. And a lot of that kind of exists from outside of the game, literally by the models and what you're pulling in physically into your collection. Then we move into this idea of the mission. What are the parameters to win? On the same opposite side, we're also going to start exploring our opponent's army. These are the points even before turn one, even before the turn one movement phase begins. We're going to look at our opponent's army and ask ourselves, what are they trying to do? What's that game plan? I mean, literally based on the models and the units they've selected, what is their game plan? And finally, their army and the mission, how is that going to work against you? What do you need to do to prevent your opponent from achieving mission objectives, and at the same time make sure you have enough models on the table that you can achieve the mission objectives? A lot of moving parts here, and this is before we interject the dice. That's kind of the first piece. Then we get into deployment, and deployment is key because 40K is a finite resource war game, which means at whatever level you're playing at, however many units you start with at the beginning of the game, with exception for some very, very rare cases, that's all you have for the game. And every turn you're going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. So having momentum, having a plan outside of just turn one and figuring out what to do, deployment is so important. And we've got to dive into more deployment and get those up into the archives here on my channel. Deployment is important because it's going to give you that edge. It's going to push you forward, so you at least find yourself in the best position. And that's what we're going to look at in this podcast, one of these 40K tactics, positioning and opportunity, to allow you to be in the best place, because the two factors that are working against you. Now, these concepts, I can port them over to BattleTech. I can port them over to X-Wing Miniatures. I can port them over to Wings of Glory, Chain of Command, other wargaming systems that I enjoy. Kind of deployment, my list versus your list, my army versus your army, and the mission. But now what's unique about Warhammer 40,000? Age of Sigmar is even a separate game on there. Warhammer 40,000 is the fact you're up against two important pieces of DNA in this game, the actual rule structure of the game. The first is the physical table. You are, again, for the most part, completely confined to the physical table. And this, you have some ability to jump over on your buddy's table or pull in some of their models or do something like that. This is where you're playing. And the fact that so many armies, and I really like Kill Team as a foil against this, so many armies are just massive on there. There's not as much maneuverability as you think. We add to this, that's the DNA of 40K. When we add to this the idea that it's a D6 based system, a you go, I go system. You move your models, you do your shooting, you launch your assaults. I might react to a couple of things. I make some saves, I pull models off, I fall back, things like that. But essentially I'm kind of sitting here. It's not like BattleTech where things are happening simultaneously. It's not like Wings of Glory where at the beginning of the turn, Wings of Glory World War I, you've got these awesome little planes, just as a kind of a contrast, and you have a deck of cards that represents physically the way your planes are able to move, based on the tech of the time, whether they climb, whether they dive, go straight, bank left, bank right, do a loop, all this type of stuff. So you look through your deck and you figure out, pick 3 cards based on where you want your plane to go, based on where you think your opponent's going to go. Everyone selects their cards, you put them down on their control panel face down, and then at the same time you reveal them as your opponent, and you move both of your models at the same time. There's a lot of examples of this. Beyond the Gates of Antares is another example where it's not a you go, I go system. Because of that with 40K, positioning is more important than ever, because in my turn, and positioning is important in any war game, obviously, but if I get into a place in 40K where I am not in the best position, if I end my turn in a non-optimal position for the unit, because it's you go, I go, I'm stuck. I'm hanging out there. And if my opponent can catch me there, that's capitalizing on a mistake. Bonus points and worse for me if you catch me in a position and you capitalize on a mistake and I'm not even aware of it. So we want to put ourselves in the best position. We also want to insulate ourselves a little bit. And in all these tactics, this is the stuff. This is the DNA. This is the gears. This is in the background going on. You need to insulate yourself from the dice. You need to, in rolling D6s. Okay, honestly, sometimes I roll. Sometimes I make mistakes and I blame it on the dice. We all do. But there are times where we can legitimately say we're having a bad turn of dice. Either I'm just hitting nothing. Grey Knight's just opening up with storm bolters everywhere. I feel like I'm watching Predator. Like we just hit nothing. And then other times it's legendary, right? I'm rolling mad dice. I'm cutting everything down on there. So we want to insulate ourselves through positioning to be in a good place where if we have a bad round of dice, we haven't made the appropriate sacrifices to the dark gods, we're still in play. We're still in play. We've still got momentum. And likewise, if we have an amazing round, the sacrifices were received, we look through the warp, we see where to go, then I want to follow up on that. So the exercise right now, think about the army you're currently playing. Maybe you have it out. Maybe you're on your hobby bench. Maybe it's sitting on your shelf. And I'm working on building some objective counters and making a display board for tournaments for my Berserkers of Scalathrax right now. So I've got the pieces out of my Cornate Berserkers, my Chaos Space Marines, and I'm trying to figure out how to get everything on one board. I think I'm going to do a couple of layers up and down with some ruins and things to try and stack it. But think about your army, whatever that's going to be. And then think about the last game that you played, or a gaming table, well enough where you can at least see most of the details on there. And if not, you could always follow the link under this podcast to my blog, because up right now, I have a piece that accompanies this podcast where we talk about this. I'll put that link down in the archives, and you can kind of go to it underneath this video. And I have different gaming tables that I've played on in some tournaments and stuff before we played on them, just to kind of ask these very questions. So you've got your army, you've got your table, and each unit in your army, what would be the best position on the table to maximize the attributes? Every unit has attributes, strength, toughness, wounds, war gear, special abilities, methods of play. What would be the best position for this? It's hard to talk about Space Marines right now, loyalists, my chaos out, but I like to use Space Marines as the currency because, again, you probably play Space Marines. I play Black Templars. You've probably played against Space Marines. My buddy who I love playing 40K with, he doesn't play enough 40K. We play about once every 2 months. He's got an amazing Space Wolf army. And of course, everything's magnetized like crazy. I don't know what costs more, his army or the fact that like everything is rare earth magnetized. He has the heads of his Marines magnetized. So this way, when they're on the table, he turns them and faces you. It's pretty wicked. It's pretty cool. So it could be Space Wolves. Chances are you fight against Marines. And according to the GW Secret Sauce Magic Formula, there's a good chance within the next 6 to 8 months you will be playing and starting Space Marines. So 2 units for Space Marines, maybe 3 units. Let's look at a Land Raider because I love Land Raiders. Let's look at Assault Marines because I love Assault Marines. And let's look at Devastators. I don't play Devastators as much because I do focus on the Assault with my Black Templars. But Devastators put out some good dice, and they're a lot of fun, and they have a lot of different weapon profiles, which makes them really cool because for the price of kind of 1 or 2 Devastator kits, you can assemble a variety of options on the table with how you want to go. I mean, really, really multi-support on there. So I've got my Devastators. What would be the best place on the table? Now, naturally, you're thinking about your gaming table. This is going to be modified a little bit based on what you have and based on the best place that you can be. So you might not be able to hit everything on this checklist or the checklists that you make for your unit. You know, if we can get 100% or 90%, great. If we can get 50, 60, 70%, great. Anything less than 50% on your internal checklist, which we're going to look at examples of, then it's really not the optimal place. Devastators, I'd like to be either on the left or the right side of my deployment zone in the corner of the board. I'd like to be castled up because this limits the avenue of approach that my opponent can move from. Likewise, if they get in close, either with some sort of deep strike or some sort of insertion, then they're going to engage my Devastators. I can't stop that, but hopefully they'll be bogged down a turn or two dealing with my devs, and the rest core of my army will be off somewhere else. So this way, when they do defeat my Devastators, there's not another target they can move on to. So I'm going to put them on the left or the right side, castled up. Ideally, some sort of elevation with the ability to see long lanes of fire on the table. You know, a kill zone, no man's land, whatever we want to call it. And preferably, if needed, cover on there. Some sort of cover, some sort of protection for that. That's the best place for Devastators. If I've got Assault Marines, Assault Pack, Bolt Pistol, Chainsword, you know, maybe some Wargear toys or things, I want to be in the center of the table because I want to be able to radiate out and to jump out in that 360-degree radius and essentially attack anything in the assault. If I'm on the left or the right side, say with the Devastators, Devastators have that reach. The Assault Marines, if I'm on the left side, that means I can hit you in the center of the table, units that come there, but I can't hit you on the right side. And of course, this is my perspective of looking at the table. So if I'm in the center, I can radiate out. Second, ideally to that, can I have something that blocks line of sight? Because you're going to try and torrent me down on there. And if I have the ability with the packs to move out, is there something that I can cover, as in, what is it, concealment, right? Complete concealment, you can't really see me. Land Raider. Well, Land Raider, the bulk of the Land Raider. On a side note, Necron Warriors, you'd be really surprised how many Necron Warriors I can hide behind two monoliths on there. Kind of the same idea with a Land Raider. Maybe I could use that bulk to shield some Space Marines, some Assault Marines on there. Land Raider Godhammer pattern. It could be back, depends on what's going to be in the payload, if I'm delivering something or if it's more of a static hang back. So now we have units that, a couple of choices to be ideal. If it's alone, I'm going to reach out the las cannons and the heavy bolters to midfield. I want to be far back. I want to be back in that position. If I have a payload to deliver of Terminators inside or some sort of assault unit inside, then maybe I want to be pushing up the midfield because I'm going to have those Assault Marines behind it so they can radiate out. You're going to go through your checklist and just kind of moving your way through. I have this with my Chaos Marines and everything on there, with the idea being that deployment, you're going to position your units so that on turn one, whether you're going first or second, there are definitive advantages to going first in 40K because it's a you go, I go system. But even going second, bottom of turn one, moving out and getting your units into key positions. Now we've got the mission going on. You're losing models, your opponent's losing models, but you're trying to maintain these positions because they're going to give you the advantage when your opponent makes a mistake. When they do something either because they're distracted, they're not thinking, they're not aware. Doesn't matter why they made a mistake. We can do a podcast on 40K mistakes. I can share some recent mistakes that I've made. And we're not talking about rules mistakes because that's what you have the books for and everything, or your best friend to ask. I'm talking about like tactical mistakes that I missed on the table that were right there, and why, and the price I paid for them. And being honest, I'm always honest with you guys, sharing the experiences, trying to grow as a player and share ideas. There's a couple of mistakes I have made in competitive play, not only in this edition, but previous editions, which tactically we can look at, that cost me the game, that really just tanked me in the tournament and either dropped me down, to maybe third place, or just last time with my Harlequins, T3 is tough to play. Space Marine players have it really good, and I've been playing Chaos, and I've been playing Grey Knights pretty heavily the past 6 months or so, 7 months. So I'm used to power armor, and when I play my Tyranids, I don't get to play them enough, but I enjoy playing them. I've got so many little space bugs and everything, that's irrelevant. But when I play my Harlequins, that's a different shift on there. And I made an intense mistake, no take backs or any of that type of stuff. I really paid the price for it. And that dropped me down tremendously. So the reason for the mistake, and we'll go into those in tomorrow's podcast or the next day. I've got to get through some comments here from the blog. Doesn't matter why it happened. It happened. Your units will be in the best possible position to capitalize on that. And again, going back to the Assault Marines, if you're in the center of the table and your opponent moves out a unit that's not supported or gives you the ability to kind of get in there and take out a character or some sort of special unit that's going to buff the rest of the army, and you can do that, whatever it's going to be. If you're in the center of the table with those Assault Marines, you can do it. If the Devastators are positioned correctly, you can do it. And again, whatever your units are going to be. So how about that for the next game? Really aggressively look at the units, regardless of what you're playing, and just try to spend a minute when you set up deployment, setting them up so as they move out or stay static on turn one, they're in their optimal positions as best as you can. It's going to be modified a little bit by mission. It's going to be modified a little bit by table and some other parameters in there. But this is one of those 10 or 11, 8, 9, or 10, 11, 40K toolkit tactics, I call it, where they're just always in play. They're just there. And they work with whatever army that you are playing. They work with any army you're playing against because they take into account the gaming mechanics, the DNA of 40K. Table size, a D6 based dice system, and a you go, I go system.